standing on the corner in Winslow, Arizona. What a fine sight to see. It's a girl, my lord, in a flatbed Ford, slowing down to take a look at me.
So my name is John PUGH. I am the artist who painted the mural, Winslow, Arizona. You're listening to the Route 66 podcast.
Hello, this is Don Adamson, and I am the one who created the Easy statue that stands on the corner in Winslow, Arizona. And let me welcome you to the Route 66 podcast.
Route 66, Route 66, right along with the Route 66 podcast. For talks with people living and working along the Mother Road. The main street of America, from Chicago to LA, bore a heavy, heavy load. Route 66, Route 66. Sometimes historical paths aren't discovered until they're lost. Right along with the Route 66 podcast.
Hello and welcome aboard the Route 66 podcast, where talks with people living and working along the Mother Road. I'm your host, Anthony Arno, and I'd like to thank you for joining us here today on our journey. A very special thanks to my Patreon supporters, including the Midpoint Cafe and Gilligan's Route 66 Tours. They not only support the podcast, but also the Route 66 Scholarship Program as well. On today's show, we visit Winslow, Arizona. Yes, standing on the corner in Winslow, Arizona. That Winslow, to learn all about probably one of the most famous street corners along the Mother Road, popularized by a song. We'll talk with both artists who have works placed on that corner. One is a mural and the other is a statue. And we also have listener feedback from Charlie Beaton. Yes, Ms. Charlie Beaton, from the other side of the pond in London, England. If you're listening to this show upon its release, August 2021, I'd love to meet you along the route this summer. Now, my schedule is not a straight run along Route 66, as one would expect. I'll have my family with me for part of my journey, then I'll double back to places along the road later during the trip once they head back home. Reach out to me here at the podcast if you think we might be able to meet up on the road for either a cup of coffee, ice cream, or maybe even a meal. Listener feedback. Here's Charlie Beaton from London. She's a strong Route 66 Patreon supporter, supporting not only this podcast, but the scholarship program as well.
Hi Anthony, it's Charlie calling in from London in the UK. I just wanted to say hello to you and all of your listeners out there from this side of the world. Thank you so much for sharing your passion and others for Route 66 on this podcast. I love hearing all about it. It's really nostalgic as well, listening to it. I did the route in 2013 with my friend Trina. Hi Trina. We missed off the California part though, because we had other commitments on that trip, but you know, it's just, there's our excuse for having to come back over and do it again, or even just finish off that last part. So it's not all bad. Thanks for the mask, by the way. I love it and I get a lot of compliments on it, which is great because I'll take any excuse to talk about my trip. So thanks again for that. I'm just catching up on a couple of episodes now, so I'm going to get back to that. Looking forward to more coming my way soon, and thanks again.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm so glad that you enjoyed the podcast, and I don't think my listeners here in the States realize how popular Route 66 is for the international community. And I'd like to thank my special group of Patreon supporters. They include Mary Beth Busatill from Florida, John B. from Rhode Island, Jim Crabtree from California, Mike Fort, Route 66 author and photographer Shelley Graham, Kristen Hackinson from Washington State, Rich Havlick from Minnesota, Mary Nicholson from Pennsylvania, Brian Sawyer from Indiana, Evan Stern from New York, and from the United Kingdom, Charlie Beaton, and from the Netherlands, Jim Renson, who was supposed to make the trip here on Route 66 last month, but unfortunately had to cancel due to the pandemic. But he's hoping to make that trip next summer. The business supporters for the Route 66 podcast include the Midpoint Cafe in Adrian, Texas, and Gilligan's Route 66 Tours, providing travelers with guided tours of Route 66 in their own Ford convertible Mustang, accommodations at Route 66 motels, and breakfast every morning. For more information, please visit gilligansroute66.com. All Patreon members will receive an extended version of today's show featuring Winslow, Arizona, Standing on the Corner Park, which will be an additional 20 minutes of content. For the current month, we're going to send one lucky Patreon winner a souvenir featuring the Standing on the Corner Park in Winslow, Arizona. Good luck. Please check out my Patreon page to see all the different levels of support that are available to support both this podcast and the scholarship program, including me showing up in your driveway in an RV where you could be my featured guest for an episode. And now here's the trivia question for today's show. On the last episode, I featured Dan Rice, who owns the Cali to 66 souvenir shop on the Santa Monica Pier. Dan was instrumental in getting the famous end-of-the-road sign on the pier, where travelers can take a picture after traveling the entire road, or maybe just beginning. Here's the question. What % of travelers travel Route 66 in an eastern direction from Santa Monica to Chicago, according to Dan? The answer after today's show. John, thank you so much for joining us here on the show with both you, Ron. How are you doing today?
Good.
John, what was your earliest interest in art?
Well, I think like most of us, I remember finger painting. And they started doing more drawings, and my parents noticed that maybe I was doing a little bit more than most kids, and that would be my earliest.
And do you have any of those finger paintings from when you were a little kid?
Probably not. There might be a chest that my parents gave me that might have some early stuff, but no finger paintings. And then I just kept painting. I was always interested in painting. I remember reading about or looking at pictures of Leonardo da Vinci, and I was going, that's pretty cool. So from the earliest memory, I knew that art was going to be something that I was going to do with my life.
And did you formally study art?
Yeah. I got into college and I became a fine arts major.
So when did you realize this might be a possibility then to earn a living as an artist? What was your big breakthrough, if you will?
I think a lot of it, we're younger, we pipe dream a lot.
We still do.
Yeah, we still do. I'm still not quite sure what I'm going to do when I grow up. But I think there was a moment where I took some time off of going to school and doing some art jobs and getting back into school, and then having the opportunity to do a mural on the art building. And when I started doing that, I realized that a lot of the things of my past, like drafting and carpentry and math, which I was always good at, but I thought was kind of dry, kind of all came back in together for this style that I'm doing, which is called trompe l'oeil, meaning trick of the eye. It all seemed to come back together for this mural I did at the entrance to Chico State University. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I had all these plans of doing this and doing that and doing this series of whatever, planets, and this inconvenient side door opens and says, hey, here's this is a path. And it's kind of funny how I think sometimes our destination are these inconvenient side doors that open, and you kind of have to stop for a second and go, oh, what's that? And that turned out to be my destiny. So.
And you're the master of trompe l'oeil, but tell my listeners, what is the origin of it, How far back does it go, and what exactly is it?
So it means to trick the eye in French, although the Greeks were doing it a long time before the French coined that phrase. And there are even stories back in the golden age of Pericles where there were, and I forgot the names, the Greek names of the artists, but they were having a contest, and one artist painted a still life that a fly landed on, and the second artist had the curtains in front of his, and it turned out that the curtains were the painting, and so he won. So everyone was fooled, like, oh, he's going to pull back the curtains. So there are stories that go back to ancient Greece, and certainly during the Renaissance there was a resurgence of it. So it's and it's gone through periods where it's more decorative, like Rococo and Baroque. So I mean, and right now it's, with the whole urban art thing and the anamorphic art and stuff like that, it's having a big resurgence too. So pretty popular.
And for my Route 66 listeners, you may recall many years ago the cover of Route 66 magazine had a chalk drawing on the sidewalk of Pontiac, Illinois, of a crevasse, if you will, of a little girl looking down it. Would you also call that trompe-l'oeil, or if it's flat, or is it just on a wall?
Sometimes it's funny. I'm glad you asked that question, because I use anamorphic sometimes with my trompe-l'oeil, but I think that the trompe-l'oeil murals on the walls, at least the ones I'm doing, are intentionally designed to be viewed by viewers from a certain distance, like a natural flow or traffic pattern, trick them into thinking that something's real that actually isn't real. With the anamorphic type painting, usually you approach it and it's this drawn out, stretched out thing, and you have to kind of get to a perspective to make it work. And so there's not the experience of being tricked, but there's the experience of making it work, and it looks good on the camera, and you can have fun with your friends. I'm not trying to belittle it, but I do think that there is a deeper human experience with being tricked. I think everybody on a deep level, most people on a deep level, like being tricked, and that's my goal, to have a viewer bond with the piece by being tricked and then invite them into the concept.
So how many would you say you've actually created? How many trompe-l'oeils have you created in your career?
Somewhere around 200, between 250 and 300 murals. So, yeah, it's going to be busy.
Yeah. And John has actually a wonderful coffee table book of all of his murals. But right on the cover is one that it reminds me of, like, when I used to teach magic. The first time you see a magic trick, you're like, wow. So tell my listeners what the cover of your book is that the trompe-l'oeil you put up at Chico State.
It's the end of a building. It's a tilt-up architecture, boring building, but I made it look like it's breaking away and exposing Greek columns, which are the kind of the cornerstone of our Western educational system. But for the longest time, I was looking at that wall kind of going, okay, this has to do with somehow this theme has to do with the university, and I don't know what I'm going to paint. And then I had a dream that the building wall was breaking away. It broke open several times. Break. And every time it broke, it revealed the columns, and the concrete would fall off the wall. That way of creating an illusion with a broken wall and showing inside. So I could say that I'm the original hole in the wall guy. So that was a powerful experience.
Now, because you're the artist, do you still see the visual illusion after driving by one of your pieces from years gone by? Do you still experience it the way a first-time observer might experience it?
Sometimes I do, sometimes not as much. When I'm creating and making the thing, I'm not going to see it as much as someone's seen it freshly. But sometimes I wish I could forget that I had painted it and see it for the first time. But that's not the case. I think some of the pieces are maybe a little stronger than others. So, and then sometimes when I'm painting them, I'll see part of the mural in the corner of my eye, and I'll go, oh, that just got me. So I can get myself a few times. Yes.
Now, John, you live up in the Northwest, correct?
That's right.
And what is your earliest memory of Route 66?
Well, the song, but to get our kicks on Route 66. But I think really the first time I really got into experiencing, I went on a honeymoon on parts of Route 66 to see some of the Canyonlands. And I remember going through a couple of those towns and seeing the hotels with the teepees. I think there's something like that in Holbrook, actually.
Holbrook and California. Yep, correct.
Oh,
Holbrook, Arizona.
That's right.
Yeah. So when did you first hear about a mural contest taking place in Winslow, Arizona for the proposed park?
I did see something I have a lot of sources where I look for public art, some competitions, and someone passed that one along to me. So I thought about that song. I thought about developing the concept and some of the lyrics of the middle verse. I'm standing on the corner of Winslow, Arizona. Such a fine sight to see a girl, my lord, in a flatbed Ford slowing down to take a look at me. And so I worked that into the reflection. The original intention was you are the person on the corner and you're looking at the windows of this old building and you're seeing a reflection of the girl in a flatbed Ford slowing down to take a look, maybe from behind, but looking at me. And the whole song kind of unfolds in the reflections and seeing upstairs in the window, the couple. There's even an eagle up on the upper window too. So
did you have to submit an initial outline to the committee, or did they just give you the ball and you ran with it?
They pretty much gave me the ball and I ran with it. And I did a sketch, and I did a refined sketch after that. But once I did the sketch, that's I think they really liked the way it was a little more subtle. It had layers, and it had a narrative in it that wasn't maybe quite so obvious. I think that's what they really appreciated more than anything else, was the way it unfolded the narrative.
And slowing down to take a look, the mural is painted on, at the time it was painted on the side of a building, but what happened to that building today? Because your mural is still up. It survived.
It's the whole building caught fire. And that was, how long ago was that? Like 10 years ago?
2004.
I remember they told me that the building caught fire and the town came out and they actually saved that wall.
Wow.
So, that was pretty cool because they had their little park going there. So I say that the mural's still standing on the corner in Winslow, Arizona. So yeah, that was something. And then there was some long-term damage, some damage that didn't surface right away. It was delayed effects. And I'm still restoring part of the bottom portion. I had to repaint the top windows, and I'm working on restoring some of the bottom parts because there was just too much damage. And also those murals, the main murals, not the ivy that's on the wall, the old sign and all that stuff, that's painted right on location. But there were panels originally that were painted as well that were mounted onto the bricks that looked like the windows with the people in them, or the windows below with the reflect. Those were the things that really got damaged.
So when you're thinking of a concept, how important is it that you know about the background or the history of the area to convey a story?
Well, I think it's really important. I think to create a sense of place, I love the research. That's one of my favorite parts of painting murals is the research and getting to know the culture and talking to people, and maybe the mural might play a role or have a couple different time periods that play off each other. There's, you can play with time and getting into a concept. So that's always really important. And then how you can make a statement or a quick narrative type thing with the history that isn't maybe any town in America mural that has this almost encyclopedic type thing with history. I like the idea of reflections, for example, or there's modern day people doing something that talking to somebody from the past, or there's ways of incorporating history that doesn't have to be so conventional. And that's I like doing that as well. And I do like creating something that is, if you didn't know the mural was there, it would create like this architectural happening thing that would be something that you would look at anyway. So that's not necessarily the case with this Winslow one, but a lot of times I'll break buildings open or peel walls back and turn things upside down, whatever I can do to get them to look at something happening with the building.
Now, we've also had Ron, who created the sculpture, did you work with him in the beginning? Did you know what he was doing?
No, they showed me the drawings and the maquette, so I knew that was going to be more of a traditional sculpture, and that certainly fits into the whole thing out there in the corner.
And the mural you put up in 1999 in Winslow, what is the life expectancy of that mural, and what's being done to preserve it? We mentioned there was a fire.
The fire
that doesn't happen every day, but just weathering and
that kind of throws a wrench into everything. But was it 1999?
Yes, the dedication. That sound right?
No. For some reason, I thought it was earlier, but it could easily be. So usually a mural like that, especially if it's treated with a certain coating, can last for decades.
Wow.
Since I did that project, I use this special like acrylic canvas stuff it's like the skin of the mural that I will then attach to the wall with acrylic gel, like wallpaper paste, and it lasts a lot longer. And then, like I said, there's things that you can put on top of it that makes it last even longer. So the acrylic binding is the problem with acrylic murals because it oxidizes and starts obscuring the actual painting. And the stuff that I put on top of it now prevents that from oxidizing. So it could last for 100 years outside. Not so with when it catches on fire, though.
Yeah. John, has there ever been a time when you were painting a mural and you stepped back and said, it's not what I expected?
I do that with just about every mural.
And what do you do after that? Do you start over?
No. It's just I might have said, I think I need to redo this part. This isn't working because it's all acrylic, and there's always layers of paint on every mural I do, and sometimes what I think is going to work doesn't always work, so I have to rethink it. Maybe this has to go darker. Maybe this has to go lighter. Whatever it is, to correct it. It's always a process, both on the sketch and on location where there's weird light variables and things happen. Or there's a tree in the way. No, there's always moments where I'm unsure. It's never just this perfect it's like unicorns from the very beginning. There's always some challenge, which I think is part of what makes this so interesting for me.
Sure. John, what's one mural you've done that really, really has tricked someone?
Well, that's a tie about those two, I think, probably. There was one that evoked anger, and there was one that evoked someone feeling scorned. No. Yeah, well, scorned personally. Okay, so the first one would be the wine glass. So I painted a wine glass on this little mural above this woman's spa in Atherton that was just sitting there. And she didn't complain about people trying to pick up the wine glass, but what she did complain about is that people try to set their wine glass down next to it, and it falls and breaks and goes into her spa. So she was sincerely angry, but to me that's like score.
Absolutely.
And then the other one, the final one, is at the coffee shop. There's a woman sitting down reading a book at a table in this mural, and it was set up in a way where she was pretty convincing. It didn't look like she was going to move, and evidently a few guys have tried to hit on her and realized that. And they actually one guy says, "What's wrong with that woman? I keep saying hi to her, and she just ignores me." So they're getting the cold, the whatever, the shoulders. Yeah. And they explained to him that it's an illusion, and then I think that just messed up their whole day. It's like, first I think I'm getting rejected, and now I'm just feeling like I couldn't even tell it was a painting. So that's probably the worst.
And I'll have those two pictures on our website at route66podcast.com. So, John, what is your latest project you're working on? I understand you're down in L.A.
So this one's almost as big as the one in Hawaii. It's a huge project, and it's the final of they did 10 murals in Hermosa Beach, which is part of Los Angeles, and you can actually see it from the pier. It's massive, and the 10th and final piece, which I'm honored to do. I did the third one, but this one was kind of a competition. The theme was this old Biltmore hotel, which, to be honest, is kind of boring. I mean, the history around it is interesting, But it's the era, it's the 20s and 30s. Everyone's out on the beach. It actually was called the Surf and Sand Club. And so what I've done is I've taken this building that isn't that exciting, but put it inside the building, and I'm having the wall curl open, and the wall is made out of it's like a sand wall, so it's kind of creating a beach in front of it, and then there's people on the beach, and it's colorful, and it's actually, in a way, I'm enjoying it because these people on the beach, they're from the Roaring 20s, basically, and it's very colorful, and they're very full of life. And maybe it's a perfect time to have a mural like that because it's the 20s, it's right after a pandemic. People are coming back out.
Yeah.
And
how ironic is that?
Kind of a full circle thing. Yeah. So.
And how long will
fun.
that take you to make from start to finish?
It's been quite a few months, a couple months in my studio and then a month out here. And then I did the core of it in my studio, and then I brought it out here, and it's too big for my studio. So I'm doing this wall coming out and the sides of where it goes in, and I did the figures in my studio, but I could cut them out. They're on this material, and I could put them onto the finished product too. So it's that makes it a lot easier to be able to use this material.
And are you doing this by yourself, or do you have a crew helping you?
No, right now I've had mostly people that I've known from the past. Some of them are actually living down near LA, are helping me right now. I have somebody coming down from Truckee, which is where I was from. But most of them are down here. I do like to try to find interns from an area where I'm installing, because a lot of times they're interested in, especially people that might be interested in this type of style. And with varying success, I get a lot of good people on location. Sometimes people that end up working with me and coming up to where I am and getting into an occupation or job, profession, painting murals.
So, John, where can my listeners find out more about your work and your creative style?
Well, there's my website. We can post those. It's the website is artofjohnpugh.com. My Instagram is @artofjohnpugh. I have a Facebook page that's Art of John Pugh. So Pugh, P-U-G-H. That's a good place.
That sounds great.
There's a short documentary that I recommend too. It's like 6 minutes long. It's called Urban Mirage, and that they really get into some depth with that too. So that covers a few murals and gets into some insights. So there's that one too.
What's next on your bucket list, John?
Back up to Ashland, Oregon, and I'm going to do finish up a project in Missouri, and I have a project coming up in California and Merced and Oakland. There's a few different things. Denver, I still have to wrap up a big one there. So there's Winslow. I want to go by Winslow and install the bottom part of that I'm fixing up. So there's different parts of the world too, but it seems like the West Coast is my biggest concentration.
So my guest today is John Pugh, who is the artist behind the Standing on the Corner, Slowing Down to Take a Look mural. And let's leave our listeners with a trivia question. We did interview Ron, who did the statue, but he didn't have anything to do with the truck that was parked out there in Winslow. What can you tell us about the license plate?
That the license plate has numbers and letters that are lyrics to an Eagles song. I'll go that far and say that. So check it out.
And that'll be our trivia question for the next episode. Thank you so much, John.
Yeah. Have a great night.
You too. Good night. Bye. Ron, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. As you know, this episode is dedicated to the Standing on the Corner Park in Winslow, Arizona. In addition to you, we also have John Pugh, who created the mural. So let's start with your interest in art. When did you first realize you had an interest in art?
Oh, I was a little child, and I would look at trees and mountains and think, how could I put that down in a painting? And I'm talking 7, 8 years of age. My parents were absolutely not interested. They never got me any painting material or drawing material. And so I did a little bit of art in high school, painting. And then as I had to go to work in a lumber mill, I started to carve during my break times on scrap pieces of wood. So that's basically where I really learned how to become a sculptor.
Now, do you have any of those pieces you drew when you were 7 or 8 years old? Do you still have them?
No, I don't. I think the most detailed ones that I ever actually sat down and drew, I was more like 15. And I believe my mother just threw them away.
Oh, so you have none of that from your childhood?
No, I don't. I have one painting from when I was 15. I stretched the canvas myself. It's in my garage. That's about as far back as it goes. So that would be like 1970.
And what is the picture of? What is the image of on that particular one?
It's a fjord in Norway with a ship in the fjord with the mountain background. And that's where my mother grew up, was in southern Norway.
And that's in your garage, so I assume you see it quite frequently?
Yeah, because my garage is also where I do a good portion of my smaller sculptures.
And what goes through your mind when you're looking at the fjord from a 15-year-old who painted it?
Oh, it takes me back a lot of years because my grandfather was a sailor, and I just think of the way life was back then.
And where were you born and raised, Ron?
I was born here in Libby, Montana, and I went all through my entire school here, all the way through a senior. And actually, as a senior in high school, I took a half a year of art and learned to do a little bit of painting. I had no clue about sculpting or carving. And my teacher was a potter, and he really didn't know much about painting. So it was kind of an interesting class. And also, my wife was very artistic, and she was in that class. Of course, we weren't married yet. And she could draw and amazingly. And for me, drawing was just not something I could do easily. I could do it, but it was difficult. And sculpture, I guess, just came more natural.
So your first job was locally in Montana, and what type of job was that?
Well, I worked in lumber, in a lumber mill. So, when I first was introduced to the lumber mill, I was about 17, and I weeded the nursery for the small trees that they planted as seedlings, small pine trees.
And then how did that lead to your interest in carving wood? That was the first medium, would you say, that you began to work with?
Well, as far as the first medium was acrylic painting. And I knew nothing, of course, about it. And my idea, I didn't know you could sell art in an art gallery. I didn't know anything about that. And so consequently, as I reached the adult world and had to support myself, I started carving, and people would watch me carve, and they were interested in them, and they started buying them from me. And so I was so shocked by that because I had no clue people would want to buy from me. And of course, that was a pretty big, charge to make another one if I sold one,
And then when did you realize, hey, maybe I can make a living as an artist? When did that sink in?
It took about 2 years because, like I said, I really didn't have any teaching into sculpting. And I always say I learned what not to do for about 2 years. Mm-hmm. And then in 1979, I left the mill and went into carving strictly as a way to make a living. But in this small part of the world, that was not easy. And so I would have to return to work to the mills to support my art habit from time to time.
And at 20 years old, you entered the Russell Art Show. Tell my listeners, what exactly is the Russell Art Show, and who was Charles Russell?
Well, Charles Russell was one of the premier Western painters from Montana. The Charlie Russell Show, as it was called, the C.M. Russell Art Auction is what it was, it became really one of the biggest Western art shows in the country. And what they would do is they would block out the entire hotel and take all the bedding out of the rooms.
Wow.
And each room then was an art gallery. And so you would go into that, and you'd walk down the hallway, and every doorway was open, and you'd go in. Each room would be a miniature art gallery or art studio or whatever you want to call it, a representation of each and every artist that was in the show. And there were probably three or so hundred of them.
And as a 20-year-old, what did you enter?
I put a fairly good-sized wood carving in, which surprised me that it was accepted, and it auctioned for nearly $1,000.
Wow!
And that was for a young guy like me. It was like I had just landed on the moon
for you. And what was that piece that you carved?
Well, it was 3 Indian figures of different chiefs from Montana that I had seen in history books, like Sitting Bull, Red Cloud, and I don't remember if I had Joseph on that one or not. Joseph wasn't really a chief from Montana. It's just been a while. But anyway, it was 3 Indian chiefs. The piece was designed to hang on a wall, carved out of rustic wood, and it was about 3.5 feet long. And consequently, that got me into what was called the quick draw. And that was a period of time with TV cameras going where you created a piece of art from the beginning in 30 minutes time, and then they auctioned it.
In real time?
Now like an hour. Yeah. And
wow. No pressure there.
I got all the TV time.
Wow.
Correct. Yeah, no pressure at all. And I was the only one doing like a sculpture. So I ended up capturing all of the camera time. The wood chips were flying, and I was hand carving this thing.
So you mentioned your early interest in canvas, and then wood, and then you entered the field of bronze. What was your first bronze piece that you did?
Well, it was what you would call an Indian bust, which is the head and the neck, and it was not very very well executed, but it was what it was. I sold it. It managed to sell for me. So they were fairly small, and I would kind of shoot for the detail. I'd make the braids and the beads and the hairlines and everything I could, and kind of went with that.
And then obviously your claim to fame is the statue in Winslow, Arizona, you call Easy. How did you first get involved in that whole project?
That is a good question, because I was at an art show in Bishop, California, and my wife called me up and she said, "Hey, you got a really strange email." And, this is before cell phones and, so on. And I said, "Oh, really?" She goes, "Yeah, somebody from Winslow, Arizona sent you an email." And I said, "Oh, yeah, standing on the corner in Winslow, Arizona." And she goes, "Actually, yeah." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" So she said that there was a committee in Winslow, the La Posada Foundation, that was looking for a sculptor to create an image from that song. And I said, "Well, did you answer him yet?" And she said, "Well, I will." And I said, "Yeah, tell them I'm interested." So she said, "Oh, yeah, we'd be happy to, submit a proposal." And she signed it off. It prints out, like I had sent it.
Right.
But she signed it off at the bottom, "Take it easy," with a whole bunch of exclamation points. And that's how it started.
Ron, was this a competition, or you were the one that they wanted? Were they set on having you?
No, it was a number. I don't even know how many other artists submitted proposals. And I was informed somewhat later that it came down to me and one other person. And the other person was local. They almost didn't give it to me, and Dr. Hackler said, "This guy has given us the best price and has what looks to us, like a couple of us, like the best design. And we're going to go with him, whether, think about it. You've said the winning bid would be the lower bid and the best image, and this guy's got it." So in essence, I almost didn't get it because they really didn't know me.
Yeah. And maybe they would have chosen a local guy. Yeah.
Well, and it was a local woman. I had never done a standing bronze before.
So what were the parameters, Ron? Was it completely open, or did they tell you exactly what they wanted?
It was completely open. So the first sculpture that I did, I had a man playing the guitar. Eventually, I flew down to Arizona with a 2-foot tall statue that I had made in clay where he was holding the guitar, because I couldn't send him a decent drawing that I felt was adequate. So I met with the committee, and they said, well, we're going to place it at street level. And I said, well, this will never work because the handle of the guitar is sticking out. Somebody at night, if they're riding a bike or jogging, they're going to knock their teeth out or hit their neck or get hurt. And so in front of the committee, I broke the arm off of the clay and took the guitar and balanced it off of his foot, because a guitar player who's standing around would never let his guitar touch the ground. And so with clay, you can move things. And so I think that surprised everybody that I was able to do that and do it very quickly. But I'd had experience in the past of having been on TV quite a number of times doing, quick carvings. And so it didn't make me nervous to just do it and concentrate on that. And so that's how it wound up in the position that it's in today, was from that room. And now here's a really weird part. In 2008, after my mother died, I was going through some of her personal effects, and I found, because my mother grew up in Norway, I found a photograph of my grandfather on Route 66 in the very position, holding a guitar on a dirt road, because there was no pavement then.
Yeah.
Where he was traveling from San Pedro, California to New York, because he was in the Norwegian Marines, or not Marines, but Navy. And I think it was just before or just after, I think just before World War II. I'm not sure on the date. I've been unable to figure out the date. And so by coincidence, here's my grandfather holding a guitar, same hand, almost the same position. He's got his hand around the neck of the guitar, where I have Easy, holding the very top of the neck and balancing on his boot.
Wow.
But anyway, that was really bizarre when I found that. After I wish my grandfather was alive to have seen this thing, and my mother for that matter.
So is Easy supposed to be a depiction of anyone in particular?
That question has been asked of me as many times as I can remember, as I could even count, I should say. I can't remember. It would be a better way to say it. Now, first off, it was going to be of Jackson Browne. And his manager called me up and said, he didn't want that, because even though he helped write the song, that was the song that launched the career of the Eagles, and it should commemorate them. So I thought that was kind of cool of him to give that up. And so I had already kind of started the parting of the hair in a similar way to where Jackson Browne wore his hair back in 1970-ish. And so the other part of that is that Jackson Browne is a short man. I'm 5'8", and he's shorter than I am. And they wanted the statue to be about 6 feet tall. So my youngest son was still at home, and I had him stand for me and hold the guitar. Oh. And I would make my measurements, from his shoulder to his elbow and from his elbow to his hand, so that I would get everything proportionately set up for a 6 foot tall man. Now again, you're asking me, who did it depict? It really couldn't depict anybody, because if I made it of Glenn Frey, then why wasn't it Don Henley?
Right.
Or Tim, or somebody else. And so it became what I thought was a good representation of anybody in the band. Right. They all would have dressed that way. The vest thing was probably more of a Jackson Browne thing. A guy standing with blue jeans and cowboy boots, that would depict a lot of guys in the 70s. Thumb in the pocket, the fingers out on the outside, and standing there at the corner, kind of not knowing which way he was going to go. in life, in the music industry or whatever, and hoping to spot the romantic girl that was coming by, stuff like that.
Yeah. Now, the flatbed Ford that's parked on the street, did you have anything to do with that, or was that later added?
That was added many years later, and there's no mention of the color of the flatbed Ford. It's now in the song. Yeah, the Ford is now, it's red.
Right.
And it's very, very obvious, and a lot of people have asked me if I knew why they chose the color and so on, and I don't know. It just wound up to be that way. And I've actually sat in the thing and had my picture taken.
So from start to finish, how long did it take to make Easy?
Well, that's another question a lot of people are curious about. It was nearly a full year.
Wow.
And the reason was I ended up having to build my own foundry to do it. And so I had never done this before. And I couldn't get a foundry. Nobody was interested in casting it for me at a price that I could afford. I mean, everybody, once they found out it was for the Eagles, the price was more than I would ever get for it. So, as an artist, hand to mouth. And so I went and I bought a Kirby vacuum, and I found a 55-gallon drum, and I used a Kirby vacuum for a blower. The first time I lit it, I blew the lid halfway off. And once I figured out how to kind of get it going, I had molten metal like within 20 minutes. So if ever you see the Winslow statue on YouTube by Don Adamson, you'll see where the bronze blew up on me. And I didn't know what I was doing. I had one explosion which could have been fatal. And fortunately, I just got a couple small burns, and nobody got hurt.
I did see that on YouTube, and I'll have it in the show notes. So tell my listeners, because I found this whole process very fascinating. For a 6-foot-tall bronze statue, is that one piece, or is that a collection of smaller pieces?
48. I made it from the feet up, and I cast it piece by piece from the feet up. I started from the feet. I welded it up to the waist, and I had sent down to Winslow, Arizona, a template of his feet, because I welded two rods into the boots on each foot so they could drop it into the ground, into the cement.
Right.
And it wouldn't tip over. And so when I stood it up and had it with the legs welded together, they were 2 inches too wide. And so I had to figure out a way to bring them in. And it just about killed me doing that. I had to wrap what you call a hand crank winch around the feet
to bring them in.
Cut it in the crotch area, crank it down. It was all I could do, and I'd be on that thing with all of my might. My feet were on one leg, and I would slip, and I'd just flip off that thing and go rolling through the yard. It's too bad I didn't video that, because it would have made America's funniest home video.
I appreciate that.
But anyway, so that's how it went.
I appreciate that, especially as a middle school STEM engineering teacher. Now, how heavy would you say the Statue of Easy is?
My son and I could lift it.
Okay.
And load it. But I'll tell you, it was all we could do. I would say that it weighs right at 300 pounds.
Oh, okay.
Not terribly. So you're making it thin. It's got to be, for the metal to hold up like that, it's got to be, about a little more than 1/8 of an inch. You don't want it to be more than like 3/8 of an inch, or you're kind of wasting metal.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, it varied. I didn't get it perfect. As I say, I had never done this before. And so as I poured each piece of the thing in bronze, I had to keep it in my head where that piece went, and not get confused over it. And because I was hand to mouthing the thing, I didn't get the thing finished, cast, and put together until the day before I drove to Winslow, Arizona to deliver it. And so the people in Winslow were having a panic as, where am I at? Where is Ron? And I got to Winslow, Arizona. There was no time to veil it and unveil it. I got to Winslow, Arizona 10 minutes before their event opened. And when they figured out it was me in the white pickup that came to town, the song Take It Easy blasted through the whole town. They had speakers everywhere. And all these people came running out, and they helped me unload the thing, and we stuck it in the ground immediately.
And what's going through your mind as you're pulling it out of the pickup?
Oh, man. It was, I was exhausted.
Sure.
Because I hadn't had any sleep for almost 40 hours. And my eyes were just bloodshot red. And I was so relieved that I had gotten it there, and that everybody seemed to just love it. They loved the sculpture.
So how does it feel to have a really famous statue along Route 66, and I'll almost guarantee you no one knows who the heck you are?
That is really true, that most people don't care who the artist is. They jump out and they get their picture taken, and then they put it on social media. I have a small version of Easy, and they go, "You're the guy that made the statue." And so there are some, who know.
Now, at the 10th anniversary in 2009, you went back to Winslow, and tell us about a very special guest who showed up standing on the corner with you.
Well, I did not go on at the 10th.
Oh.
I was very disappointed to find out that Don Henley was there, because I really wanted to meet him.
Oh.
And so I found out after the fact that he was there.
Oh.
That was disappointing.
And during the planning stages, did you have any communication with John Poe, who did the mural?
No, none, because the only time we met each other was when I installed the statue. He was there.
And I actually have a picture, which I'll put on our show notes, of you and John at that dedication ceremony. A really neat picture I came across. So is it fair to say that Easy, by far, is Ron Adamson's claim to fame?
It really is. I've done some other things that people are not aware of. For example, my artwork has made it to the White House under 3 presidents.
Wow.
And I've also made awards for Hollywood actors. It was for the Silver State Silver Screen Award. I've done other things, but Easy's the big one. It's the big feather.
And then more recently, you've gotten into chainsaw carving. Is that correct?
It is. I've helped start and create a number of shows for chainsaw artists. And, I come from a chainsaw town. And so it was just kind of a natural thing for me, I guess, to get into chainsaw carving.
So what's next for Ron Adamson?
Retirement. I'm 66 years old this year. I don't know. I create artwork every day, pretty much. And almost post what I do online on my Facebook page as I work on it.
And how can our listeners see more of your work? What is your website? How can they reach you?
Well, if they, there's Ron Adamson on Facebook, and they'll see me I call it my office. I have a balcony over the Kootenai River.
Well, I'm so glad we're able to connect with you. I know my listeners are really going to enjoy the whole backstory to Standing on the Corner Park in Winslow. Before we say goodbye, you're born and raised in Montana. What is your earliest memory of Route 66?
Of Route 66?
Yes.
The old black and white TV show, I get my kicks on Route 66. They used to play that little tune.
Right.
And that used to we had a black and white TV. And I used to look at that and I'd go, well, we have Route 56 up here, and we have trees and mountains and a river, But the weird thing is, the first time I heard the song Take It Easy, which was in 1972, I was actually on my way to Norway for the first time to meet my relatives. And when I heard the song, it just stuck in my head. I immediately liked the song. I'd never heard of the Eagles. When I heard the song Take It Easy, I just liked it immediately. I would never have dreamed that would touch my life the way it has.
Yeah. What a great story.
Well, I was going to say, the Eagles song made Winslow famous.
Absolutely.
My statue gave them a place to go. So my part was the place to go in Winslow and have your picture taken. And I'm just grateful the Eagles wrote the song and I got to be a part of the history.
And I think I read somewhere originally the city was going to be Flagstaff.
Correct. I think the song that Jackson Browne, I think he might have even been in Flagstaff when he wrote it.
Right.
I'm not sure. But Flagstaff didn't roll off his tongue the way he liked, and so he come up with Winslow.
Yeah. All right. Well, Ron, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule.
Thank you. It's my privilege to be on your Route 66 podcast.
All right, Ron. Have a great
much.
Night, sir. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
There you go. Both John PUGH and Ron Adamson. I will post a picture of Ron's grandfather standing along a Route 66 sign with his guitar in hand. I mean, you couldn't have planned it. A man standing with a guitar alongside a Route 66 sign in Arizona, and then 75 years later, that man's grandson creates a life-size statue of what else but a man holding a guitar. You gotta see it. Route66podcast.com. I'll have both pictures and video of some of the work that both of my guests today have created. And now the trivia question for today's show. On the last episode, I featured Dan Rice, owner of the 66 to Cali souvenir shop on the pier. Here's the question. What % of travelers travel Route 66 in an eastern direction from Santa Monica to Chicago? Well, according to Dan, it's about 10% of the travelers. Next time on the show, I feature a rather dark period that took place along Route 66, an event that happened just 5 years before the birth of the Mother Road, but only recently received mention with the 100th anniversary this summer. Here's a clip of my talk with Scott Ellsworth, noted historian born and raised in Tulsa, and he has written extensively about the events that took place exactly 100 years ago this summer.
What is known today as the Tulsa Race Massacre, which happened in 1921, was the worst single incident of racial violence in all of American history. Over the course of 16 hours, more than 1,000 African-American homes and businesses were looted and burned to the ground by mobs of whites who were assisted by the Tulsa police force. Hundreds of people were injured. To this day, we don't know how many people were killed, and more than 10,000 people were made homeless. Even as a 9 and 10-year-old, I also heard what would seem to be like urban legends at the time of bodies floating down the Arkansas River, which ran 7 houses from where I grew up, of machine guns on the roofs of buildings, of airplanes being used. But it was almost impossible to find out anything. It's important to remember a lot of the official records were stolen and destroyed. It was almost impossible in those days to get any photographs of things. But I had seen one photograph, and it was a panoramic of Greenwood, which the African-American neighborhood was called after the massacre, and it just looked like Hiroshima or Nagasaki. What happened in Tulsa in 1921 hasn't changed. What has happened is what we call these events. And some people wanted to call it a massacre. I don't think we really have a good term. I once called it race massacre as the term of the day. Well, no one's ever heard of this because it was actively suppressed for more than 50 years. This is an astonishing story. For listeners, when you're planning to take a trip down Route 66, and you'll be able to go and see there's a brand new museum. You can see some of these rebuilt buildings. And then right on historic Route 66 at 11th and Peoria is, of course, Oak Lawn Cemetery, where we've been involved in the search for mass graves.
That's Scott Ellsworth on the next episode of the Route 66 podcast, talking about an incredible event that took place just before the birth of Route 66 and never really discussed in the history books, not until recently. And if you're traveling through Tulsa, I think it would be worthwhile to stop and look at the buildings and other memorials recognizing that event that took place exactly 100 years ago. Well, thank you for taking the journey with us here at the Route 66 podcast. Please visit route66podcast.com for detailed show notes and to see both pictures and videos featuring the work of today's guests. And if you're listening to this upon the release, please let me know if we can meet up along the western half of the road. I'm your host, Anthony Arno. Be well.